Welcome to
the Plant-Based Podcast.
In case you didn't know already, plants are amazing. You can
Eat them,
wear them,
drink them,
nourish your skin with them,
grow them,
love them,
and be inspired by them. So why not join us on the Plant-Based Podcast as we speak to the movers, shakers, and growers in this amazing plant world.
This episode of the Plant-Based Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Natural Grower. Launched in 2019, their award-winning liquid fertiliser and soil conditioner is made entirely from maize. Visit naturalgrower.co.uk to nurture your soil and boost your plants and veg. Enter PBP15 for a 15% discount as a PBP subscriber.
Okay, so we're back here in the Southampton countryside with Chris Packham. Before we started recording, I said to Chris, how do you usually like to be introduced? And he told us a little story about what he put on a passport application once. What was that?
Yeah, no, in the old days, they asked you what your occupation was, and they would handwrite it into the passport. Anyway, I was feeling a little bit naughty, so in the application form I wrote wastrel, which is not a word in common parlance anymore. So it's got a medieval ring to it, I think, and obviously it's someone who wastes their time. And it got passed, and I was described as a wastrel in my passport for 10 years. Thankfully, I wasn't wasting all of my time during that 10-year period, but I did have a chuckle every time the passport was opened when I returned to the UK.
Well, we certainly wouldn't describe you as a wastrel. We can tell that you're so busy.
Welcome, Chris Packham Wastrel, to the podcast.
You're doing stuff all the time. You're involved with countless projects, TV shows, charities as well. But we want to kind of get down to kind of root level. We want to talk about your love of gardening. Because I'm a plantsman, she's a plant addict. Where are you with plants?
Well, you're surrounded by my attempts at gardening. It's not very formal, but it's deliberate.
But the pollinators love it.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's full of insects, bees, wasps. Saw some beautiful blue butterflies.
Yeah, we've got
here.
holly blue over there at the moment. They're on the ivy. They lay their eggs on the little ivy buds at this time of year. I watched one laying one here the other day, so having that ivy was a bonus. And then behind us, of course, we've got very unfavourable ragwort, and that's all going to seed at the moment, along with some thistles here. And again, that to many people was going to look untidy. It's in the process of reaching the end of its flowering cycle, but it's not untidy at all. That's part of the way it's meant to be. The thistles here have been ripped apart by goldfinches. The teasels over there will be next. And when I came to the house here, the area that immediately around us was all lawn. Now, there's nothing more boring than a lawn. Nothing more boring. So as you can see, I scraped off the topsoil to impoverish it as much as I could. And then over a period of years, we've had a succession of sort of wildflower meadows. Now, they've all been different. Some have been more colourful. Some became dominated by things like oxeye daisy. This one at the moment is looking quite unusual, and that's because, if I'm very honest with you, I had to strip it back to nothing because I had mare's tail.
A gardener's nemesis.
Are there no pollinators that enjoy mare's tail?
Rabbits will eat them, but they're, as you know, when you pick one up and scrunch it in your hand, they're full of silica. They're not the most palatable plant, probably why they've been kicking around for so long. They're a very ancient species, but they will just clog, and that just became a solid block of mare's tail. Anyway, so we've cut it and cut it and cut it, and there's not too much coming up in there now, as you can see, and we've knocked it back, but it has been a real nuisance. The other thing that surrounds us here is a very tatty bed of lavender. When I I came to the house, it wasn't fenced, and there were deer and rabbits in the garden, and someone had tried to plant some roses here, and they were basically feeding the deer and the rabbits. So I then planted these. Was a thick bed of lavender, because neither of those species will eat it. It doesn't flower for very long, but it offers a lot of nectar. Over that period, it does flower. So I put a few different varieties in the hope that I would extend that flowering period. Didn't do terribly well. The reason it looks so ragged is that Sid and Nancy love chewing lavender. Even when we started, he was over
Can I just say,
here.
if you listen to the last episode, Sid and Nancy are dogs.
Yeah.
What type of dog are they?
Well, they're the black miniature poodles. They're carnivores, but they've got this taste for
I didn't want people
lavender
to think that was the neighbours you were talking about, Sid and Nancy.
They come on over for a munch
I had
on
to
the
set
lavender.
the context.
But for some reason they've broken it all up, and they love chewing the root, and they bring it indoors. It's obviously something to do with the aromatic quality of the plant, I presume. But I've had other poodles here, itch and scratch, showed no interest whatsoever. So, yeah, they've done a little bit of damage. So the patches, as I say, a lot of people would look at them and think they're not splendid, but for me, they're remarkable. This spring, I've been able to walk out of my door, and 3 steps, I'm in as close to a wildflower meadow as I can get. I can kneel down, and the abundance of life there has been astonishing.
Yeah.
I think there's more and more respect for wild areas in
There's
gardens.
many years we've been told lawn, formal borders, or pave it over, all of that. And now actually we're being told let it go, let it be, let some wild areas in
say
your
no
garden.
to the mow is one of my...
No
I just moved
mow.
into this new house, and I don't even want to cut the lawn, because I don't even want the lawn to be there. Just trying to ignore it, even though all the long grass is up around my sun lounger now.
It should be. Wait, you'll be lying on that sun lounger listening to the stridulating of grasshoppers.
Yeah, I won't mind.
And then you'll have a lot of the, quite a lot of, the brown butterflies. The grasses are their larval food plant. So the field beyond there, which I also look after, has been planted with wildflowers. Last year I put a lot of seed radish in there and quinoa, and that fed the birds through the winter. The field that's on the other side of that hedge there, I planted up again with loads of umbellifers this year. A bit more radish. So, it's all about, basically opening a resource for wildlife here. The elder tree I put in here, it's just the berries have just about finished now. Prior to that, of course, they have lots of flowers, buddleias around the place to get the butterflies in. These ones I've never done very well, those little buddleias there. And then the chestnut tree, you'll see it goes right down to the ground. I just like the shape of nature as it should be.
Yeah.
I don't like sort of having to control it. I think that, my job as a wildlife gardener is to offer nature an opportunity.
Yeah.
Not restrict what it can do by keeping some of it out or changing the shape.
It's helping it, not controlling it, and that's the difference. I've loved seeing some of the verges around the roads during the pandemic, during lockdown, because they haven't been mown back, and some of them just look so beautiful. So beautiful. Anyway,
I just want to ask something else about plants before we move on, because obviously you're known for the Really Wild show, which is about kind of unusual animals, unique animals. But in terms of plants, are you interested in like the weird and wacky plants? Were you growing Venus flytraps and things like this as a kid? Give us just a few words on that.
No, Venus flytrap.
yeah.
Honestly.
Let's talk plants.
As a kid, the Venus flytrap was like it was like something out of Jerry Anderson.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre. A carnivorous plant. It breaks all the rules. And then when I had my first Venus flytrap, which didn't last very long because I watered it with tap water. But anyway, my goodness, getting the paintbrush and putting it in and tickling the little hairs and I just endless fascination. I think we're all drawn to carnivorous plants. There are a few actually that have sort of gone native in the New Forest.
Really?
Yeah. Cyracenia, the ones those sort of trumpet ones, they grow out there in a few of the bogs.
Really?
I think people have just been naughty and put them in, of course. But they're still there. So I loved all of those things. I then, when I left university, that first summer, I decided that I wanted to see all of the British orchid species, which is quite a tall order because there are quite a lot of hybrids. Some of them are very rare, obviously, and difficult to find, and they're, quite quite protected. So for 2 years, I drove around the UK photographing and looking at all of the orchid species. I even went out here in the New Forest and spent a lot of time looking at the last recorded site for something called Summer Lady's Tresses, which was a small orchid that liked the wet areas of the forest. Disappeared in the 1950s, beginning of the 1950s, when the forest was drained. But we found out the precise location, and we went out there, those 2 years, and we looked in any parts where the ponies couldn't be nibbling,
awesome. Wow.
trying to find. Oh, we didn't find them very.
To
rediscover.
Not so awesome, yeah.
Rediscover the Summer Lady's Tresses would have been amazing. But no, so I went to the Outer Hebrides, north of Scotland, everywhere to see all of the orchid species. And in the meantime, of course, it wasn't just about orchids, it was bumping into all of the other plants, because in all of the diversity of habitats that we were looking for those, there were other interesting things. So I've got to be very honest with you, I'm very much a native plant person, but I'm not a horticultural plant person. So outside of the very obvious, when I go into a garden centre, I don't really know my stuff.
Okay.
Better in the fields, not in the garden.
We won't test you, don't worry.
No, listen, I can tell I don't know a rhododendron from an azalea.
That's pretty good.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I've someone who I know in Norwich has terraced house, urban environment, left his back garden, didn't mow it because he just couldn't be bothered to mow it, and all of a sudden he realised it was full of bee orchids.
Oh wow!
Full.
Can you imagine?
Full. And now he just obviously at the end of the year it gets mown back, and then that's it. He doesn't mow it. Full of bee orchids. Absolutely beautiful in the middle of the city.
It's great.
Isn't that incredible? Nature
I think probably
is amazing.
what happens, sometimes the soil's moved around when people are building, because very often you'll find plants, won't you, out of context, and it will be because someone's dumped a load of chalk there, or they've moved something else around. And there's been a number of colonies of orchids actually that we used to look at, and they were completely in the wrong habitat, but they were on roadsides, roundabouts, where roads had been constructed, those sorts of things. And I think it's because the soil gets moved around.
Right.
So maybe in the distant past someone dumped some soil in his back garden, and he's now reaping the rewards of that.
Oh my gosh, he so is. It's totally beautiful. So obviously this episode is all about plants, and we can't eat, drink or breathe without them, can we? They are critical to every single thing on earth, and you campaign for wildlife and nature. Just tell us a little bit about the importance of plants and conservation of our natural world.
Well, firstly, we have a problem in that people are drawn to animals. In the UK, they're principally drawn to birds because they're accessible. There's not too many of them, and they can find them and see them easily. And I think people then move on to the other very obvious animals, butterflies, which are obviously moving about, and you get to see. Dragon and damselflies attract attention. Then you've got the quirky things, which are more difficult to engage with, but that's the challenge. So people get into bats, but not enough young people are encouraged to take an interest in botany. And of course, as we know, there's just a wealth of fascination in the green world, as we call it. Everything from the ferns, the mosses, the bryophytes, all of those sorts of plants and their bizarre, sexual behaviour. And then if you want exotics, you've got them in the form of the orchids. If you want rarities, you've got them in the form of pasque flower and everything else, or even now some of the old cornfield annuals. There's corncockle growing around here in my garden. You'll see it sort of come to an end and seed heads are there. But you won't find much of that out now in our agricultural fields. So, and then you've got all the cultural associations with those plants, their medicinal uses, and then the way that the animal part of our biosphere is dependent upon them. Yeah. So I was a victim of this as well. I didn't get into plants until I was probably in my early 20s, by which stage I had a pretty fair understanding of the ecologies of most of the habitats around us. Not good. So I think we need to instigate more interest in plants at an earlier stage, because, as you said, life is, terrestrial life, is entirely dependent upon them.
Yeah.
And managing them, understanding, how we manage plant ecology is instrumental in terms of how we manage everything else.
Yeah.
And also, it's just even, trees, plants, obviously. The long-term strategies that we have to employ. I mean, it's all very well having a meadow here full of poppies and corn cockles and corn marigold and corn flower and everything else that used to be in corn, but now it's all sprayed off, and with glyphosate you never see them. But that's one strategy. We're looking over here at oak trees, which are growing for 350 years. You need another strategy for them. So you've got to understand the organisms, but in order to be able to work with it.
Yeah. That's interesting. When I was young, we often talk about this, about our love for plants when we were younger, and how it was seen as just a bit geeky or a bit weird because we liked plants. And I can always remember seeing my careers teacher when I was about 15 and sitting in literally a broom cupboard. And she said, so, what do you want to do or be? And I was like, well, I don't know, but I like plants. And she kind of flicked through her book and then she looked at me and she just said, well, you could be a nurse or a teacher.
Or you get, I had the kind of school's career computer then spat out florist or landscape gardener. And it's like, just very basic choices. And and they almost sent you to horticultural college because they didn't know what
else to do with you.
Which is so patronising. I mean,
it's very
we're all having the last laugh now anyway. So.
We're not quite there yet, but
But just talking about plants, obviously we're dependent on plants, but plants are dependent on pollinators. Yeah. What kind of take-home tips would you have for listeners in terms of creating more pollinator-friendly gardens in whatever space, perhaps even on balconies, very small areas? Is that possible?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm bound to fly the native flag, and we know that insects that have insect pollinators. In the UK, we've got insect pollinators. In other parts of the world, you've got birds, bats, other mammals, and so on and so forth. But ours are insect pollinators. So, our insects have co-evolved with our species of plant, and therefore they are more attracted to them, and they're better, evolved to pollinate them effectively. So think about native species. If you don't do natives, you're still planting. If you're putting in a flower, you're putting in an advert for nectar, which is fuel for many of the adult mobile invertebrates, butterflies, all the wasps and flies and bees and everything else. So you're providing part and parcel of its resource, but the fuel. But that's like the fast food. That's the takeaway. If you really want a restaurant, then you've got to put in the food part for the rest of the animal's life cycle. And I think the key thing is to offer nectar throughout the season. So my garden starts with snowdrops, it then moves to primroses and bluebells, then I have a little patch over here which I put in of snake's head fritillary, which are more ornamental,
lovely.
but enough of them come up, and then the meadow starts to happen, and it goes through a succession of different things in the meadow. We've got the mallows at the moment, we've had umbellifers in here, we've had the vetches, they've all had their time, and then at the end of the year, just fast forward to the end of the year, I've got the ivy here, which is really important for those insects which are going to overwinter as adults, and they need some fuel to stock up before they hibernate. So that's things like red admiral butterflies, it's things like queen wasps and queen hornets and those sorts of things. So I'm not the master gardener, but what I've tried to make sure I offer is a spectrum of nectar-giving plants, fuel if you like, across the whole of the year. So that's dealing with the fuel if you like. Now, in terms of the decent restaurant, then again the ragwort's here because I had a cinnabar moth on those. I leave the grass, patches of grass long here because that's the food plant of many fly species, butterflies, so on and so forth. So you've got to be thinking again and about satisfying all of the ecology of these invertebrates, and it's so easy to find out. You just go online now and what's the food plant of, and then you can think about offering it. So again, if people would come to this garden and think it's not very structured, it's very definitely and deliberately untidy, because I'm so fed up with tidiness, but there has been a planting regime here.
I think to someone who is a gardener or who loves plants, you can see that it is intentional. That definitely you can see that.
I think just the public have a perception of something that looks a little bit wild is not great, but slowly they're hopefully realising that it's much better. for nature.
And I love it how nature finds what you're giving them, you know. I love that. Like, you can literally...
I'm still waiting for the birds to find the bird seed that I put out.
Do you know, I was thinking, so you've put that birdseed feeder on your window, but they can see into it might be your movement putting them off inside. It might be a bit... Do you know what I mean? Like,
you know, these ones on the suction pads.
No, they do work quite well, and some of the birds which are, don't mind people, things like robins, are very, often...
You feed them on your hand.
Form an association. To be quite honest with you, they've got to find it. And the thing about birds is that they're living on a knife edge invariably when it comes to finding food, either to get through the winter, which is tough, or to raise their families in the summer, which is tough. What they can't afford to do is to go somewhere where there's no food. So on one occasion I had a bird feeder and it was hanging outside my office, and I had a whole gang of nuthatches would come onto my feeder. And they were there all spring, all the way through the summer. And then I ran out of food, and the people that were delivering it, there was some sort of hitch. Anyway, so I ended up not having any food for a couple of weeks, pretty embarrassing. Obviously the birds disappeared. And when I put the food in, the blue tits, the great tits came back, and my nuthatches didn't come back. But when I peeped over into my neighbour's garden, his bird feeder was about, 10, 15 metres away from mine, covered in nuthatches.
He stole your nuthatches.
Well, they just couldn't, they haven't got the time to travel to a restaurant which is closed.
Yeah.
Couldn't they just send one representative?
Well, that's what they do.
Have a little look?
Yeah, that's what they do. And then, so eventually one of them will go on a foray.
Yeah.
And one thing we know about birds is that they watch one another the whole time. They will watch where they're flying, and also they were able to judge other birds' fitnesses. So they know whether that other bird has had a decent meal, it's been found a good roosting site, and all those sorts of things. So that's how once you get one, it cascades into others. But it took me a long time to get my nuthatches back, because they wouldn't waste their time flying 15 metres just in case that restaurant was closed.
Did they come back eventually?
Yes, they did. They did.
Glad to hear it. Yeah. Phew.
Presumably because his bird feeder ran out and we found mine. But
did you sabotage it?
It's true though. They do find what they need if it's there. We live in North Carolina for part of the year, and I've only got a balcony there, so we put lots of like lavenders and lots of herbs, and we've let them flower. And I then came back to the UK, and my husband's still there, and he phoned me and he said, "There's a bee on the balcony." I was like, okay. He's like, "There's a bee on the balcony, 6 floors up in an apartment block in a really urban environment." He was so excited that there was a bee on the basil. Yeah. They will find a way. Talking of birds though, should we be feeding them all year? Because I constantly read different reports about whether we should feed them over the winter, or should we leave... in the summertime, should we feed them in the summer, or is there enough
If you
natural
stick your head around that
resource?
corner, there's a bird feeder about 1.5 metres long, which is topped up with food as soon as it gets anywhere near the bottom, and that's why you can hear those goldfinches. There's greenfinch here as well, in and out at the moment, and also siskin.
I have to have a look. I'm sorry.
So yeah,
Michael's off. Good job you've not mic'd up.
Peek round the corner.
Oh my lord!
Is it really big? I can't get up. I'm like hooked up.
Yeah. So I feed them all year round. I mean, look, the thing is, it drops off. The abundance of birds and the time that they spend at the feeder drops off when they have their young.
Yeah.
At that point, they're only eating for themselves. They're feeding their young primarily on invertebrates. They need the protein. So people don't have to worry about their young. And there was nonsense when I was a kid. People would say, "Oh, you mustn't feed them peanuts in the summer. They take them whole and they'll choke."
Yeah,
them.
I've read
you
that.
hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Not true. They will come to top up their own resources, and then they will go back to searching out invertebrates for their youngsters. So it is important because that's a tough time of year. Again, we know short days in the winter time, short foraging time, cold nights, small bird, surface area volume ratio means that they've got to eat. Blue tit's got to find food every 10 seconds in the winter. So.
Every 10 seconds?
Every 10 seconds. When I say knife edge, I mean we're talking real knife edge here. And that's why they're so particular about what they eat and where they go to eat it. Because they can't afford to make mistakes. But in the summer, they've got to raise a family. It's exhausting. Sure. They're foraging from, 4 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. So if you can provide a little, stop off for them where they can immediately access some sunflower hearts to top themselves up. And then you've got the non-breeding birds which aren't breeding. And then, of course, when when the young do leave the nest, there's this little hiatus where they leave the nest and they're still eating insects, and then all of a sudden they flood onto the feeders. You get masses of young greenfinch, lots of young great tits come at that sort of post-fledging period. And again, you're setting them up with a better chance of survival as they go into their first winter.
Yeah.
If you're feeding them then. So I think if you can afford it, you should be feeding all year round.
If you can afford it, be a feeder.
Yeah.
Like my mum.
I just worry sometimes in an urban area, is it as easy to attract the birds because there could be more predators, not as much.
Well, yeah,
places to land. Do they get a lot more nervous in urban
You've got to be
spaces?
careful where you put your feeder. I mean, obviously, if you in an area where you've got non-native predators, domestic cats in the main, then don't put it somewhere where the cats can reach it. Try and put it close enough to cover. Birds like it to be relatively close to a tree or a bush because they will land there first to see that the coast is clear, and then they will come in. Sometimes they'll take a seed from it and then go back to the bush to eat it. So sighting the feeder is undoubtedly important. And with regard to other predators, well, things like sparrowhawk, for instance, if you get a sparrowhawk coming to your feeder, that's a badge of honour. It means that you're supporting enough small birds to in turn support one of their predators. So although sometimes people get very upset with the sparrowhawks that come in and murder their tits and finches on their patio, that is in fact saying that you and your neighbours, your community, is sufficiently productive that it's supporting not a top of the food chain predator, but it's maybe a top of the food chain predator for that community. So that's, as I say, it's an accomplishment. It's not something that you should.
Oh,
be
my mum's
cross about.
always complaining about the sparrowhawk in her garden. Always. Yeah. She literally screams running down the garden when it's there. I'm not joking.
It's my favourite bird.
I think they're amazing, and she's like, "No, stay away from the blackbirds."
She's his predator.
she's a sparrowhawk predator. That's brilliant.
This episode of the Plant-Based Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Natural Grower. Visit naturalgrower.co.uk to nurture your soil and boost your plants and veg.
One thing that we probably, I don't think, have covered in the last episode and this one so far, especially when we've been talking about the natural world and plants, is the importance of trees. So I'm like an out-and-out tree hugger. I love a tree hug. I love being in woodland and just the peace of it and listening to everything around. And do you hug trees first of all?
I touch them, not so much embrace, I suppose.
Okay, well, touch is good.
But
Just gentle petting.
Gentle pet, yes.
I'd sort of touch them in the same way I might sort of touch a piece of ancient Egyptian architecture or something like that. I don't sort of need to touch them, but being in their presence is awesome.
Is it? Yeah,
basically.
I agree.
And I'm a massive tree fan, and there are certain individual trees that I love, and one tree in the woods here is outside of Sid and Nancy is the most important organism on earth for me, and being in its presence is just an enormous privilege, and it's a humbling experience. It puts me in my place every time I go there.
Yeah.
This tree is somewhere between 450 years old.
Incredible.
It's a pollard. It's vast. It commands such attention when you go to it. Its natural architecture is astonishing, and you gaze up into this towering crown of boughs, particularly in early May when the leaf just has come out of bud, and you get that intense green colour, and you can taste it in the air at that point. Those fresh leaves, particularly if it's been raining. And I sit at the base of that tree, and it's an incredibly important place. I mean, there's nothing spiritual about me, but it's a place that I go to when I need it, when I need to go there. Because under that tree, over hundreds of years, people have loved and lost. They've laughed and cried. They've got married and died. They probably murdered one another. Who knows?
Probably under the tree.
Probably under the tree. And I always sort of think, in a sort of really sort of trite, romantic way, if trees could talk, can you imagine the story that tree would would tell?
Yeah.
And I go there, and it's been part and parcel of my life, and I want that. I so want that tree to be alive when I die, because I like the idea of just being like some sort of transient little thing that's just moved through, that stroked its trunk and sat on its roots, but of no consequence. They give trees like that just give real context to who we are and how we should behave in our time and space, you know. And I do revere that tree, you know, and it's incredibly important to me.
That's like fantastic, and like the passion when you're talking about that one tree is immense. That's all amazing, and I know something that you are currently campaigning about is the HS2 project. So this sounds like this is a complete change now, isn't it? Like going to HS2 and their delivery, which is cutting down trees, and importantly, some really old, important trees as well.
Biggest pear tree, biggest wild pear tree, and lots of 108 ancient woodlands are going to be impacted by HS2, either destroyed or damaged. Ancient
but
woodlands.
We don't even know if HS2 is actually going ahead, but they're still
it's going
they're still going to cut down the trees.
They're going to cut down that pear tree. I think it might have gone. And
oh my gosh.
you know, and this is a project that's going to cost you and I, the taxpayer, over £100 billion to move people, essentially, you know, from one place to another, when we know that we don't do that as much now. We Zoom and we use other video conferencing. We also know it's there to facilitate airport expansion, and we want to be cutting back on airports and not expanding them for obvious other climate reasons. And we know that isn't going to be carbon neutral until well into the next century. I mean, I could just go on and on reeling off, you know, all of the problems with this enormous infrastructure project. But of course, you know, what got me interested in the first place was the fact that they were going to be cutting down those ancient trees, because they're irreplaceable. And you know, if anyone had the temerity to say, do you know what, we're going to go around and we're going to burn down all of the Tudor houses, right? We're just going to, you know, we're going to burn them down. It wouldn't be allowed to happen. And even if they did, they could rebuild them, because you can rebuild a house.
Yeah.
We could rebuild them as this house that we're sat outside is a 17th century farmhouse. 35 years ago it burned to the ground. There was nothing here apart from the chimney. And look at it. It looks like something from the 17th century.
Wow.
Because we have the capacity to and the tradesmen and the tools and the technology to rebuild houses. You can't rebuild a tree. And the nonsense, the abject nonsense that HS2 Limited put about with their mitigation measures, you know, where they're planting more trees. And they're saying they're going to plant millions of trees. Well, the first lot of trees that they planted, 80% of them died because they didn't water them. And they said it was cheaper to plant new ones next year than water those trees.
No.
And you know as well as I do that if you put a tiny little sapling in the ground, the chances of it reaching maturity are tiny.
Slim, so slim.
Tiny. That beech tree that I spoke of in the wood, can you imagine how many other beech trees germinated in the year that it germinated? And there are none others standing today. They die through disease, they get cut down, they get eaten by deer or squirrels or other herbivores. Fungus infects them. I mean, you know, everything's against the trees. And now you've got changing climate, and you've got acid rain, and you've got, you know, everything else. So this idea that, oh yeah, we're going to replace all this ancient woodland by putting in loads of saplings and then not even bother to water them, I mean, come on.
That's painful.
13% of the UK's land surface is forested. It's the lowest in Western Europe.
Yeah.
France, Germany, all of the others up into the 30s. We've got 13%. And of those, less than 2% are ancient woodlands in good quality. 2%. We're hanging on to the last vestiges of our most biodiverse, rich, culturally important habitat in the UK, and this lot are cutting it down. Well, I can't, you know, comprehend that. And so as a consequence, I've got to campaign against it to have them think again about this project.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's clear we all share a love of plants, but we also all share a love of social media. And social media is a tool that I think you use very well, Chris. How does that work in your campaigning, and how do you see the benefits of social media, and how has that changed the landscape of campaigning?
Oh, it's radically changed it, radically. It's been, you know, conservation and environmental care has got quite a toolkit these days in terms of the technologies and abilities that we have to change things. We can restore habitats, we can reintroduce species, we can repair things. But in terms of getting them done, it's become our most important tool in recent years. I can instantaneously communicate with a like-minded community of people. I can educate them and be educated by them. We can build a strength in that community, and so using social media properly is something that we need to learn to do, because we're advancing a lot more quickly now that we have access to that. Whereas in the past, of course, there were a lot of individuals out there who might be, trying to look after a tree in their village which is threatened because someone wants to put a house up. Well, now that's out on social media. It comes to people like myself. I'm not very happy about that. I don't know the tree, I don't know the village, but I know what's going on because I've seen it happen alongside me, and therefore I have immediate empathy and sympathy for that, and I'm likely to join in. So that's because I'm part of that community that cares. So it's a really important tool. I mean, obviously the downside is that those that oppose your views or have different views can sometimes behave very badly on social media. And, I'm quite resistant, I'm very resistant to the sort of hate that I get. It fuels me to try even harder, to be quite honest with you. But I do worry about it from other people's point of view. I've seen other people, very upset and damaged by online hate. So that is something I think that we do need to regulate. When you see people and they're posting sort of homophobic, anti-Semitic, all of these sorts of hate crimes.
Yeah, that should not be allowed.
That's got to be stamped out, I'm afraid.
It needs to be used for the good of the world, not for the bad. I've had some hate because I promote the benefits of trees and forest bathing and being outside, and I've had some nasty comments about that. I don't really understand how you can have so much hate for someone that's just promoting how amazing trees are.
Problem a lot of the time.
Yeah. So you're right. But it's great for campaigning. It is great for getting word out there, and it's a really, really important
And I learn
tool.
a lot. I mean, that's the key thing. There's a lot of very knowledgeable people out there, and they post things, and whether they tell you things directly or they stimulate you to find out more. So even this morning, I've been writing recently. I've been getting into the salmon farming issue off the west coast of Scotland, which is environmentally destructive and comes with a lot of ills, it seems. But I didn't know too much about it. I needed to sort of educate myself, get to the bottom of the economic aspects of it, the environmental harm and how it's caused, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And I got a tweet. I'd been doing this for the last couple of weeks because I'm thinking of sort of again starting to campaign about that. But you can only campaign if you know what you're talking about. So I'm just trying to make sure I know what I'm talking about very precisely. And then I saw a tweet this morning, and there was something completely new that had come up. Right. And before you arrived, I was reading about this. So it is extremely valuable. There's no question about that.
I think I've learnt more about plants, honestly, through social media than I had reading about them up to that point. Like, obviously education continues now, but I think it provokes something. Oh, what's that? Or how did that work? I must go and research really that. So you do
connected people, and also when you've got an interest that isn't mainstream. Like for me, when I was a kid loving plants, I didn't know anybody else that loved plants at the same age. But these days, I'd be able to find that easily.
It's like a whole world.
Less lonely, more connected, more knowledgeable. It's just
if used in the right way.
Social media. Do you ever have to have a bit of a detox from it though? Do you have a day where you don't look at it? How do you handle that side of things?
No, not really. I mean, I don't look at it every single day, I suppose. Probably maybe I do. I mean, I think most of the time I've got some campaign running along, and it's part and parcel of that now. But I mean, I do use it more professionally than personally. I don't do a lot of personal social media.
Don't put your dinner on it.
No. Don't look to see what anyone else is eating. I'd be upset because my dinners are so poor. It's
about how you arrange it.
Is it? Yeah. Well, when it comes out of the microwave, it's in a plastic tub. There's no scope to arrange it. No, I do. I use it every day. An indulgence. I do have an indulgence. I follow a lot of very good photographers on Instagram, and I will if that's my sort of personal indulgence. So I go onto Instagram and I'll look at their work, and I find it stimulating from that point of view. And I also have sort of hashtag abstract art and various other things and things like that. So I tend to use Instagram for sort of visual stimulation, basically ideas and looking at what other people are doing photographically. But the other platforms is basically it's about work, it's about getting things done, it's about changing the world.
Changing the world. Absolutely.
Amazing.
Love that. Talking about changing the world, have you got any new projects coming up? You mentioned, I think in the last episode, about you were writing a book.
Yeah, so Megan and I have written a book. It's essentially going to be a manual for those people who have re-engaged or engaged with nature throughout the course of our spring and summer this year under the COVID crisis. And it's sort of, it's not a wildlife gardening book. It's not a community conservation book. It's not a sort of how to deal with, addressing your impact on the climate book. It's a series of case studies which I hope will stimulate people to think, do you know what, I've got to take more interest.
Okay.
I've got to take more. The salmon farming thing is a case in part.
Yeah.
I don't eat salmon, but a lot of people do. But they do so because they're unaware of the ills of that particular industry. So I took that as a case study because I want people to engage more with what they eat, because that's our daily connection with nature is what we put in our mouths to sustain us.
Yeah.
Because that has come with an environmental cost of some kind.
Yeah.
Now, it could be low, it could even be good, but a lot of them are very harmful. So I took that as a sort of a case study to say to people, look, think about what you eat. Here's a case in part. Do you eat this? If you do, here's some stuff you really ought to know. And these are the questions that you really ought to be asking about what you eat, so that you can make a more informed decision. And if you do, realise that the enormous harm that some of those things that you're eating, producing those things is doing, then you've got, you can stop it. And you can the pound in our pockets is very, very powerful. And we spend a lot of money on food, and as a consequence of that, we have to make sure that we eat healthily, but not just for ourselves, but for the environment too.
Yeah.
So this morning I was looking at a campaign that I'm just about to join in, which is lobbying.
Another one.
Well, I'm supporting it. I'm not leading it. So Open Cages have gone to a number of supermarkets and retailers about the conditions that chickens are kept in the UK. And they've had a very good response. Marks & Spencer's, Waitrose, KFC have all come on board, and they said that they won't, countenance using animals that are kept in those sorts of conditions. At this point in time, Tesco's won't sign up. So I looked at some film this morning, the undercover film that they'd gone and got. I couldn't believe that this was going on in the UK in the 21st century. It was just grotesque. It was sickening. If you want to eat meat, right? I won't get on the vegan bandwagon, but everyone should be cutting down, but you definitely ought to be eating meat that comes from animals which have had the best quality of life that they possibly can. And what I saw with these chickens, which people as we speak are going into Tesco's and buying, it was terrible. The reason they're going into Tesco's and buying them is because they don't know. They haven't seen what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
I had a really simple solution, which I've mooted before, and that is that when you go to buy meat, then there should be a picture of not that animal, but the conditions where that animal was living.
You wouldn't buy it.
They would not buy it.
You wouldn't buy it. If you
no
knew you
one would
wouldn't
buy those chickens if they saw what I'd seen on that undercover filming this morning. It was sickening. They would not part with money for that. The vast majority, anyone with any heart wouldn't do that.
You took part in Veganuary, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Is that where some of this has kind of come from? Is that realisation there? Or?
No, so I've been veggie since my 20s.
Okay.
And then I'd been sort of bordering on vegan. The only thing that tempted me, was cheese, basically. I'd given up everything else. So it was cheese. And I was living in France, and the cheeses were amazing.
Nightmares, though.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
So, but then I just sort of thought, well, do you know what? Are you going to fly the flag or not? And so I gave up the cheese, and I've been vegan now for a couple of years, and it's great. I mean, it hasn't impacted on my health, hasn't impacted on the quality of the food that I eat.
Yeah.
And in terms of animal welfare, that was one of the reasons why I was veggie in the first place. At that point, we didn't know so much about how the livestock industry was impacting negatively on the climate. And I still don't, my personal health is not top of my agenda. I've become slightly more concerned about that as I've got a bit older, of course, but certainly not in my 20s. So it was the welfare thing. And I've worked with Compassion in World Farming, still do so. Philip Limbury, who runs it now, is a fantastic bloke. And I've been to some hideous farms. And I just know that if other people had been standing in my Wellingtons amongst that mud and blood, they too would have given up eating.
Yeah, I quite agree. I've been vegan for a couple of years as well, and my feeling about it is exactly the same. I think if people could see what actually happened, why do we not see it? Why is that information not out there? Why are those videos not mainstream? Why not? Because people would simply not want to eat it. They just absolutely would not do it.
Their choice on it by seeing it.
Yeah. It shouldn't be hidden away.
I think I think we've got to go through a period of transition now. We can't bankrupt all of our, livestock farmers overnight. Yeah. But one thing's very clear, and that is that, we pay an enormous sum of taxpayers' subsidies to those livestock farms, and a lot of them are not profitable. So that's going to come into question, certainly after Brexit. We know environmentally we've got to eat less meat, and we know in terms of our health that we should be eating less meat. So during this period of transition, we should be encouraging people to eat the very best quality meat in terms of their nutrition, and also the impact that it's had on the animal's life and the environment. And I work with a number of organic, not all organic, but farmers, and the quality of life for their livestock is of a different order. And if people want to go and pay a premium and to eat that meat, that's what they should do. So they should spend maybe the first point is they spend the same amount of money as they spend on meat, but they actually just buy less of it because they buy it from respectable sources, and then they enjoy it a little bit more, and that's how the transition needs to work. But
I think it's just like
in 15-20 years we won't be having this conversation.
We can't feed the world, can we, as we're going?
Well, look at the number of people who've gone over to plant-based milks.
Yeah,
it's like 45% at the moment.
Yeah, I think it was something I just read today or yesterday that there's now like 23% of the UK now have plant-based milks, which is up by so many percent, maybe. Yeah, what you just said, but that's
but
amazing.
Even then, see, the thing is, right, a lot of people go for almond milk, but when you look at it, is that environmentally friendly? Vast amounts of water are used.
I think oat is meant to be the best.
Oat is meant to be the best, but it's a learning process for us, so I don't think we can be criticised for making those mistakes, because we've got to learn as we go. And we're trying something new here. We're moving from dairy products to plant-based products. Another thing that concerns me greatly is that when I became vegan, I looked very carefully at, I scrutinised as carefully as I could food labelling. Food labelling in this country is atrocious, absolutely appalling. You can't find out where it's come from, you can't find what it's got in it or in it. It's just nonsense. But a lot of the foods that I was going for had palm oil in it. And there's nothing environmentally, sound about eating palm oil products. So being vegan is not a one-stop ticket to environmental or ethical eating. It's part of a process that you have to go through to constantly, shape your impact on the environment through what you eat and what you spend on what you eat. So, again, I do get quite intolerant of people who are critical of this. We're learning on the job, and that's
completely
what we all should be doing. And if we make mistakes, we put our hands up and we say, I'm sorry, I've been found out there, I've changed my mind. I used to like almond milk. I don't have almond milk anymore. I'm with you. I'm with oat. But that's okay.
Yeah. You learn as you go along. It's a process. Wow. Plant-based is the future, though.
I know. Well, we could talk to you all day.
Yeah, we could. We really could. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
You're most welcome.
It's been a pleasure and an absolute privilege to sit here in your garden, listen to the birds all around us as well.
I can ask a question just to finish off, though.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So I'm going to ask the same question to both of you. And that is, tell me, what is your favourite plant? It can be a tree, of course, as all plants. So, if it photosynthesises, what is your favourite?
You can't ask a plant addict what their favourite plant is.
That's my least favourite question.
Well, I know, because there's so many of them. But people ask me all the time about birds and animals. They always say, what's your favourite animal? What's your favourite bird?
Well, I'm ready. I've always got a stock answer.
I know what your answer is going to be. I'll say what yours is and you say what mine is. You know what mine is.
Oh, yeah.
Iris.
Marigold.
Yeah.
I think for me, iris, because I grew up gardening with my grandparents, and I remember painting an iris on a stone at school or for a local flower show and winning an award for it. And so I just kind of remember the iris and how we divided them each year, and how my grandma taught me how to know what colour they were going to be from the stem. And then I've got a lovely iris tattoo here as well. So there's an iris for me, the one that always comes to mind.
My marigolds are memories as well. So my uncle was the person who got me into gardening, and he used to have loads of them. He used to have an organic kitchen garden and he used to plant tons and tons of these marigolds, and I always used to wonder why there were so many of these orange flowers around, and I guess I didn't ask then. But of course now I realise it was for companion planting, and the bees absolutely love them, and I love the smell of them. I love how they glow in the evening. I just absolutely love them. We were in Bali last year, and they'd put them outside the shop doors for for the spirituality, that kind of thing, and just
It's interesting how you both picked plants that you encountered very young in your lives. You've both gone for those sort of the formative species, as it were.
Yeah.
It just shows that, once you've got that connection, it germinates and grows, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That's the key, isn't it?
What was your favourite plant?
Yeah.
I'm going for trees, see.
That's good. That's cool.
Probably go for yew trees.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because they're probably our they are our oldest living organisms that we have in the UK.
Right.
And again, there's something that they have a real presence, and
they're really mysterious.
Yes, that's it. That's what I like about them. That's why I'd go for yew over oak or beech or any of those others. I love the colours of those deciduous trees, but the dark blue of yew, and sitting under a yew in winter time can be quite, you can feel the ghosts and the ghouls and all the vampires. and you're sat under a yew in a churchyard that was planted before Christianity and before our language, and that's
really something.
Just amazing.
Yeah,
plants are incredible.
They are.
Thank you.
So you, when you take the key out of your car, it makes a little song.
I know.
It's cute.
It's like a kind of ending song. We need an ending song for the end of the series as well, don't we?
Yeah, we needed a little jingle for us. It's been an epic series 3, hasn't it?
Definitely. We need a duff duff, like EastEnders.
Oh, yeah.
All the dramatic moments.
That would, we so should have done. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Oh, defo. And our final episode was so good, we had to split it into 2.
Yeah.
So you've been enjoying that over 2 weeks.
Wildlife hero.
Yeah, defo. And we delved into his plant love a little bit as well, because, of course, we're the plant-based podcast and we have to do that too. Yeah.
It was
been
awesome.
a really good time.
It's been really, really good. And some of the highlights, we've done the best of, but we interviewed Liz Earle. And we travelled all over, and we were recording even during lockdown, and we've done loads via Zoom, which allowed us actually to reach some more people further afield.
Yeah, nothing really stopped us when it came to that, and it did, indeed, make it a lot more versatile. And now we're casting our net even further, because where we can't visit people, we'll obviously Zoom or Skype them. So it's amazing the whole world knows about Zoom now.
I don't know.
Before that,
and no one used it whatsoever, but now it's like the thing, the go-to thing for communication.
Oh, that's amazing, isn't it?
I've really enjoyed it, and also a thank you to our sponsors, Natural Grower, who've been involved in the podcast as well all along. So it's been a great series. I'm really looking forward to series 4, because we've already got some in the bag.
Yeah, super cool. So we've got an award-winning garden centre. I haven't cleared with you what I can talk about yet. Somewhere that grows very colourful plants, and something else that I can't remember.
Orchids?
Yeah, you gave it away.
Did I?
I was trying to talk in code.
Oh.
Colourful plants. But we're going to have lots of fun. Obviously, still leave us your suggestions if there's anybody you think we should be speaking to. And more importantly, leave us a review. There's a glitch in the Apple system, which means that we can only accept 5-star reviews from now on in. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back with Series 4 soon.
Oh, dear.
This episode of the Plant-Based Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Natural Grower. Launched in 2019, their award-winning liquid fertiliser and soil conditioner is made entirely from maize. Naturally rich in nitrogen, potash, phosphate and other trace elements that plants and vegetables love, It is approved by the Soil Association, Vegan Society and Organic Farmers and Growers. Visit naturalgrower.co.uk to nurture your soil and boost your plants and veg. Enter PBP15 for a 15% discount as a PBP subscriber.
Thanks for listening. You should now be at least 25% more obsessed by plants.
Please follow us on social media. You'll find us by typing in the Plant-Based Podcast.
We also have a fabulous website. Go to theplantbasedpodcast.net.
So tell your friends, leave a review. Why not write a letter to your local MP? Please spread the word about the Plant-Based Podcast.
Oh yes, see you next time, plant friends. The theme music for the Plant-Based Podcast is an excerpt from the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editing is done by Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.